In this video, I'm going to be going over my top 4 tips for helping you get your progress notes done more quickly so that you can get your work done on time, you can spend more time at the bedside with patients, you can free up mental bandwidth, and ultimately provide better patient care. So let's get right into it. Hey, my name's Conan, and I'm a first-year resident doctor in internal medicine. Throughout my time in medical school and residency, I've constantly been thinking of how we can make the process of doctoring more effective, more efficient, and more optimized. One of the biggest areas that I feel like there's room for improvement is the writing of daily progress notes, which takes up a pretty significant portion of our day if you let it. We spend so much time behind computer screens working on documentation and so much less time just face-to-face with patients. And this is contributing a lot to physician burnout, poor well-being, etc. If we can really reduce the effort needed to write our daily progress notes, then I feel like we can make a lot of strides towards reducing physician burnout. Imagine your brain is like a funnel, and you have all the things that you got to do on this side and all your completed tasks on this side. In the morning, you have notes, you've got orders, consults, you got to talk with the discharge planner, you got to figure out travel for the patient when they're getting home. It's all on this side. When you put all of that and you try and slam it down the funnel that is your brain, it can get all stuck there. And it's easy to see how you can get really overwhelmed. You're jumping back and forth from task to task. Imagine if you could take the notes part of that and just zip it through the funnel right away at the beginning so that it's already on this side and you just free up so much of your mental bandwidth to do all the other important tasks of the day. And I think that's one of the key reasons that I think it's a good idea to try and get your notes done as early as possible. So let's get right into it. So tip number 1 is to stop handwriting to pre-round. In medicine, it's kind of this tradition and this custom to get to the hospital early in the morning, 6 a.m. or 5:30 a.m., open up the EMR, and then get out this piece of paper and just start jotting down all the vitals in the labs, making these fish bones and everything. I think it's really interesting because we have all of this modern technology that is literally right at our fingertips. And it's got all this information already. It can easily print it out already for us, or it can bring it up readily available onto a mobile device. And so that process of handwriting everything is not only inefficient and slow, but it's also very redundant. And so I feel like as we move forward, we really need to get out of this habit of handwriting everything as we pre-round. And it's something that I see basically every resident doing, and it's just something that's been passed down through medicine as this kind of tradition, but I'm not really sure it's the best practice. Why waste time transferring all of that information to an inferior format like paper when you already have all of that information and you can design smart phrases to automatically pull in all of that information for you? Not only that, but it'll give you more information because when you are handwriting, you're pretty limited in the amount of information you can write there. There's a time limit. You can't write out every single lab that they've ever had. But with printing, I like to pull in, for example, 6 lab values from their CBC and their BMP. So it makes trending things so much more easy. Whereas with handwriting, you typically only trend a couple of values and only for 1 or 2 data points. Then you have to go back to the EMR and then re-input all the stuff and all the information that you had collected onto your handwritten piece of paper. And so it's just this extra redundant step that I feel is completely unnecessary. When you stop handwriting to pre-round, you are getting rid of an excessive and redundant task. And that's going to allow you to finish your work more efficiently and more quickly. So again, tip number 1 is to stop handwriting in order to pre-round. And I really hope that moving forward, we see this practice start to fade as time goes on. Tip number 2 is to design your notes to pre-round for you. And what I mean by this is that you should aim to make a template that has all the smart phrases that automatically pulls in all the data that you want early in the morning. And this will speed things up by so much. The key principle that you want to have in mind is that you want to reduce clicks, because clicks, in order to go through the chart and look at different pieces of data, take a lot of time. Not only does it take time to use your brain to remember what areas you need to check, but also you click and then you have to wait for the page to load, which takes 3 to 4 seconds all the time because Epic's a little slow. It just builds up and it adds up a lot over time. So if you can have a note that automatically pulls in a lot of the information that you normally look for, that can save you a ton of time. So here's some examples of how I made my notes personally more effective for me in terms of pre-rounding for me. And these are a lot of like really small and subtle changes, but I actually felt like it's helped save me a lot of time. The first thing I did was when going into the vitals, I have one set of vitals on the left that I can report to the attending, but I also have the range. And previously, the range of their vitals was over the past 24 hours, but I felt like that wasn't very helpful because I'd already been there the previous 12 hours. All I really wanted to know is, did they have a fever overnight? Did they have a massive change in their blood pressure overnight? So I changed the reported range to a 12-hour range instead, and that's really helped me a lot. I also added a smart link that pulls in the liters of oxygen that a patient is on. So for example, if somebody's on 2 liters nasal cannula, right next to the O2 sat where it says 98%, it'll say 2 liters nasal cannula. And this is really helpful because if they're not on any oxygen, it's just blank, nothing shows up. But if they are on oxygen, I don't have to look and figure out how many liters they're on. It automatically pulls it into my note for me. For ICU, a lot of times we have patients with A lines for blood pressure monitoring. And so I added a smart phrase which pulls in their maps over the past 12 hours as well, because a lot of the ICU attendings prefer to hear their blood pressure values in terms of the map instead of the systolic and diastolic blood pressures. Next, we move on to the ins and outs. I have this smart phrase that automatically pulls it in. And previously, there was only this one smart phrase that didn't refresh. So every day you would have to go in and type in the smart phrase again. But now I worked with the Epic team in order to make it a refreshable smart phrase. And now it's so much more helpful because now it automatically refreshes their ins and outs and I never have to look at the intake and output page anymore. Next, I added in a smart link which shows all of the medications in a really nice and succinct format. And this is really helpful because when you're going to your assessment and plan, it's actually very helpful to have the list of medications inside the actual note itself, because then you can just scroll up a little bit and you can see exactly what dose they're on, exactly what medications they're on, and you don't have to go to the summary tab and then the medications part and then try and look over there. It just makes things so much more smooth to have it in your note. So as you're writing your assessment and your plan, you can easily transfer that information down there. For my labs, I default to pulling in 6 of the most recent values for the CBC and the BMP and stuff like that. And I also made it into a very print-friendly format. And so there's 2 columns, and basically that makes it so it takes up less space when I'm actually printing out my stuff. Again, this is really helpful because I'm trending 6 values, whereas normally when you're handwriting stuff, you're only trending like 1 or 2 values. A couple other things I did is that I added a smart link which pulls in the last bowel movement. Really helpful because I put it right after my bowel regimen. If the patient is constipated, it's really easy for me to tell that I need to add something to their bowel regimen rather than going through all these complicated nursing flow sheets to look specifically for a bowel movement and then usually not noticing it because I don't check people's bowel movements every day. But now that I have this thing in the note, I do know, if my patient's been pooping or not. And finally, a smart phrase that brings in their active lines, drains, and airways, which again is really helpful because it totally reduces the number of clicks that I need to do in order to figure out what lines and drains my patients have. Just in general, I've made a lot of small formatting changes to try and make my notes a little bit more compact, not only to improve the legibility, which I talked about in this previous video, where I talk about how to improve your writing of progress notes, but also when I print it, it's a lot more compact so I can print it into a smaller format. So all of these small changes, they're relatively small, but they really do add up at the end of the day, and I think save me a lot of time at the end of the day. So I really think if you can improve your template, that'll be huge for you. So my next tip, and this is tip number 3, is to start your notes first thing in the morning and finish them by noon. Obviously, you're already gonna be starting your notes because you're using them to pre-round now, so you're gonna have it started. But I think starting the note early and not doing this whole process where you're handwriting things just entirely skips that handwriting step and saves you so much time in order to get that note done by noon. So let me just tell you my current process for going over patients and chart checking them in the morning. So first thing, I take a look at everybody's vitals on the list and I just go down real quick, make sure there's no glaring abnormalities like a fever overnight or a big change in their blood pressure overnight. The next thing I do is I go straight to the notes section in the patient's chart and I find my previous note and I copy forward it and immediately start putting in all the data that I've learned from overnight. So if I get sign out from the overnight resident that something happened overnight, I'll immediately start putting that into the 24-hour interval events. Now, my note really does pull in a lot of the results in the labs that I need, and it automatically does that for me, but I still do make the habit of going to the results review to check all the data that's come in, because sometimes there's new imaging studies or less common studies that may not appear in my note template. So I go to the results review, and if there's anything glaringly abnormal, then I will also go into my note and put that there. So for example, if the hemoglobin dropped from 11 to 8 suddenly overnight, I will write in the 24 24-hour interval events, that hemoglobin 11 down to 8. And I find that at this point in my career, I'm no longer, waiting and hiding suspense and waiting until it gets to the objective before I say the hemoglobin dropped from 11 to 8. I found that it's much more efficient and effective to just mention straight at the start of your presentation that hemoglobin was 11 and dropped down to 8. And it kind of primes everybody to start thinking a certain way. After that, I go back to the notes section and I browse through all of the notes from the overnight people. A lot of the overnight nurses can leave really helpful documentation in there, and I'll add that into my 24-hour interval events if it's important. And sometimes there's new consultant notes as well, and if they have any new recommendations or new things that they suggested, I will also put that in the 24-hour interval event. At this point, I just go straight down to the assessment and plan, and I quickly review it, and then I update it with any anticipated changes that I think are going to happen or any plans that I think I'm going to suggest on rounds. So the next thing I do is I open up Microsoft Word and then I transfer my note to Microsoft Word. I try and make them 2 pages per patient, and then what I do is I print off a page with 4 pages per sheet, so that saves some paper, and then I'll print that out and I'll go and pre-round on all of my patients. The next step that I'm trying to do is actually just to remove this printing step entirely. If you take a look at my video up here about using an iPad in the hospital, I'm going to try and start integrating an iPad into my workflow and hopefully using that instead of printing paper. So after I go and pre-round on all my patients, I talk to them, I ask them how they felt overnight, I do a quick physical exam, then I go back and I quickly update the subjective and objective portions of my note. And then, booyakasha, we are done with the note. It's pretty much completely ready to go. I'm basically ready to sign it, but I just need to finish rounds so I can wait for the attending to add any recommendations or see if there's any different plans that they wanted to do instead. And then right after rounds are done, I can click sign right away after making a couple tweaks. So again, start your notes first thing in the morning and finish them by noon. Now let's move on to my last tip, which is tip number 4, and that is that your notes don't have to be perfect. And you need to get away from trying to make them perfect all the time, because as everybody says, perfection is the enemy of good. And really, what you want to do is just get them done. The notes, honestly, they do have an impact on patient care, but of all the other things that you can do in the hospital, it's one of the lower things in terms of how much impact on patient care they have. The higher order things are definitely talking with discharge planning, getting your orders in quickly and correctly, calling your consults early so they can see patients as early as possible. I think as medical students and early on in residency, we try to make these perfect, beautiful notes where we wax poetic about our assessments and the broad differentials and our plan for everything, and it just becomes this huge essay. But you really start to notice that none of that really matters. Primarily, these notes are for the billing department. And obviously, if you're writing an H&P and you're writing a discharge summary, those are much more important documents where you should spend a lot more time to make sure everything's correct. But for your daily progress note, it doesn't have to be perfect. And I think having that mindset is really going to help you be able to finish them earlier and finish them on time. If you ever start to notice that you're just spending too much time on a note, you should just go back to this concept and just remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just get the main parts in that you need to and just get it done. So that way you can finish all your notes by noon. Anyways, those are my 4 tips for helping you finish your progress notes more quickly. So again, the tips are to stop handwriting in order to pre-round in the morning. Allow your notes to do the pre-rounding for you. Start your notes first thing in the morning and finish them by noon. And finally, the 4th tip is don't try to make your note perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I really hope that these notes help you get your notes done more quickly, more efficiently. I hope they allow you to spend more time with patients, spend more time actually thinking about the management and rather than just doing busy work, which leads to physician burnout. And overall, I really hope this lifts a weight off your shoulders in terms of not feeling that there's a huge burden of documentation on you all the time. Because once you get those notes done, it's like you're set free, honestly. So anyways, if you enjoyed this video, check out my other video here, which is a video where I go over how to actually write better progress notes in order to provide better communication between the other members of the medical team. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked it and enjoyed this content, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps my channel out. And thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.